Unit 26, Decentralization Debate. One of the important problems of organizations, including that of public organizations, is the issue of centralization versus decentralization. In fact, this is one of the dilemmas facing the government and the administration today. While on the one hand, the compulsions of socio-economic planning, the requirements of national integration, and the consideration of defense strategy pull the administration towards centralization. On the other hand, the political commitment for autonomy, greater participation by the people, and need to take democracy to grassroots pull administration towards decentralization. We are thus we are thus confronted with contradictory pulls and pressures. To further illustrate, in the words of Avasthi and Maheshwari, the Planning Commission symbolizes the trend towards centralization, while Panchayati Raj epitomizes the trend towards decentralization. In this unit, we shall discuss the meaning of decentralization, deconcentration, delegation, and devolution, and the system of decentralization in India in the pre and post independence periods. The future trends in decentralization and functioning of rural and urban local bodies will also be explained. Decentralization meaning. The term decentralization is understood differently by different individuals or groups. Louis A. Allen refers to it as one of the most confused and confusing of the administrative techniques that characterizes the art and sciences of professional management. To quote Piffner and Sherwood, in some respects, decentralization has come to be a gospel of management. Firstly, it is regarded as a way of life to be adopted at least partially on faith. Secondly, it is an idealistic concept with ethical root in democracy. Thirdly, it is in the beginning a more difficult way of life because it involves a change in behavior running counter to historically rooted culture patterns of mankind. This is why the new organization behavior. This is why the new elite, the new literature of decentralization dwells on how to bring about changes in organization behavior. Men find it difficult to delegate, to think in terms of abstractions required by long-term planning, to listen rather than to give orders, to evaluate other men and their work in terms of overall results instead of irritations and tensions of the moment. Yet this is the very key to the behavior required of leaders in a decentralized organization. It is clear that decentralization is not only a device for the delegation or dispersal of administrative authority, but it is also a democratic method of devolution of political authority. Further, in a decentralized organization, it is also essential to adopt the democratic norms. Such norms help the various levels of the administrative organization to develop a reasonable capability for the exercise of authority to reach the most desired decisions. Moreover, they help to assimilate in them the virtues of greater interactions, not only among the various organizational levels, but also between the organization and the clientele among the general public. It has been opined that decentralization refers to the physical location of facilities and the extent of dispersal of authority throughout an organization. Hence, it is an arrangement by which the ultimate authority to command and the ultimate responsibility for results is localized in units located in different parts of the country. It is argued that assigning of functions and responsibility for their efficient and effective performance to the subordinates or subdivisions is the essence of decentralization. We may say that in a decentralized organization, lower levels are allowed to decide many matters and a few cases involving major policies or interpretations are referred to the higher levels of the organization. However, in common phraseology, the term decentralization is interchangeably used with terms like deconcentration, devolution, and delegation, though they have different connotations. Thus, decentralization denotes dispersal of authority among the lower levels of organization and its field offices. Deconcentration, delegation, and devolution. The word decentralization is often confused with delegation, deconcentration, and devolution, which is not correct. The point is that all these words have their own meanings. For instance, delegation is not a transfer of authority, but it is simply an assignment of authority to a lower body by a higher level of government. Delegation is merely a technique of administration or management, while decentralization deals with deep urgencies of democracy. Like delegation, deconcentration is also a technique of administration. Deconcentration denotes assignment of certain functions to the agent of the central or state government in the field. There have always been difficulties in governing the country from the center, and so the government is compelled to deconcentrate certain functions to its agents or officers in the field. Another another synonymous term is devolution, which is not very much different from deconcentration. The method of devolution is applied to the formally constituted local authorities, while deconcentration is applied generally to the field agencies or staff. It is thus clear that delegation, deconcentration, and devolution are simply the technical methods of efficient administration. The meaning and scope of decentralization are much wider and deeper. It is a process of democratization of political power and thereby aims at achieving democratic values in practice. Decentralization aims at widening the area of people's participation in decision making, micro level political authority, and autonomy through transfer of specific powers to people's representative institutions at the bottom. To make the distinction more clear, Panchayati Raj is an example of decentralization. State governments in India demanding for more powers amounts to devolution. The district collector being vested with authority over development departments in the district is an example of deconcentration. The Commissioner of Police delegating powers to permit holding of public meetings to the Assistant Commissioner of the concerned area is an example of delegation. Important of decentralization. Development administration is basically oriented towards speedy socio-economic transformation. Hence, throughout the developing world, there is universal concern now to design new forms of administration to match the needs of development. Decentralization has been looked at as a singularly useful mode of administration to deliver the public services from convenient local centers close to the client's locality. Bringing administration to the doorstep of the citizen and establishing a direct relationship between the client and the administration have been the driving force behind decentralization in most of the developing countries. The urge for decentralization has come from many sources. Firstly, it has been prompted by the need to deliver the basic public goods like food, housing, water from local units of administration as soon as possible. Secondly, most people in the developing countries live in rural areas which are away from national capital located in distant urban area. Administration has to penetrate the rural areas and link these up with the nation as a whole. Thirdly, in many countries, sociological diversities manifest themselves in ethnic, linguistic, and religious differences. Administration needs to be decentralized in response to regional diversities. Fourthly, regional and local resources can be utilized for area development purposes only if administration would move out to the regions and localities. Decentralization, therefore, facilitates local planning and development with the help of local resources. Fifthly, decentralization has its own value in political and administrative terms. Politically, local participation in development activities with intensive responses paves the way for meaningful articulation of local demands. Planning thus becomes much more realistic and receives ready political support. From the administrative point of view, local capability to govern local areas increases through sustained participation in local decision making. Decentralization is expected to release local energies and enlist local support for development activities. In the process, the local community can steadily attain political and administrative maturity. Approaches to the concept of decentralization. The different approaches to the concept have been clearly profoundly presented by Fessler. Following his classification, the approaches can be grouped into four categories: the doctrinal, the political, the administrative, and the dual role. The doctrinal approach seeks to transform decentralization as an end in itself through a process of romantic idealization. The Gandhian concept of concentric circle of power distribution and the idealization of village community in Panchayati Raj have reduced decentralization almost to a dogma and as an article of faith. Instead of treating decentralization as a means to the achievement of some end values, such idealization tends to elevate it to the status of a hardened doctrine. The political approach underscores the essentially political character of the decentralization. Initiatives to decentralize and willingness to pass on powers and functions to decentralized units and to allow these units to actually operate within a framework of autonomy are politically determined. Creation of field units of government away from central headquarters exemplify deconcentration. Decentralization in the shape of devolution to local self-governing bodies marks an attempt to set up autonomous governments at the level of the locality. Field units of governments like district administration are the long arm of the central government. To create and maintain local government is thus a major political commitment. In the absence of such commitment, devolution to sub-national governments, including self-governing bodies, will remain more in law than in practice. This leads to what Fessler has called illusory decentralization. Both Panchayati Raj and municipal government in India represents to a considerable extent this sort of facade devolution. The administrative approach to decentralization is motivated by efficiency criterion. Enhancement of administrative rationality becomes necessary. When field administrative units are set up through a process of deconcentration, the measure is considered appropriate for field level decision making and prompt problem solving. In this process, administrative units might come up at many levels between the locality and central headquarters. With more and more demand for specialized functions, multiplicity of functional departments would appear at the field level. The administrative situation gradually presents a picture of polarization between general area based administrative demands and specific function centered claims of particular functional departments. Currently, district administration in India is faced with this problem of area function duality. decentralization in administrative terms may not therefore always guarantee clarity of authority and orderliness of operations. To promote such operational principles, conscious attempts are needed to readjust from time to time the conflicting claims of area and functions in deconcentrated field administration. Finally, the dual role approach, as Fessler puts it, is a kind of rehearsal of the area function dichotomy in a new setting. Decentralization is placed within a larger context of development and change, as distinguished from maintenance of a status quo. Conceived in administrative terms, the dual role approaches seeks to highlight the conflict in field administration between tradition and change. Most field administrative systems are evolved in an earlier era mainly to maintain the established order, to collect revenue, and to keep things from going wrong. Almost all the developing countries that have inherited the colonial field system are seeking to bring about speedy and social economic change. As a consequence, there has been a radical change in the functions of field administration. To quote Fessler, the intent is to change established ways of doing things so as to carry economic and social development forward rapidly. This contrasts with the status quo orientation of a field system geared to maintenance of the established order and may conflict with the personal orientation of field generalists so chosen and trained as to identify themselves with the classes, families, and other groups who constitute the establishment. Resolution of conflict between two different orientations in field administration calls for adaptation of decentralization to changing circumstances. The theme is not unfamiliar to Indian administration in general and to district administration in particular. Types of decentralization. Four different types of decentralization can be identified. Example: with administrative, functional, political, and geographical. Administrative decentralization refers to decentralization of authority to the lower officials in the administrative hierarchy of organization. It may also mean decentralization powers or functions to the subordinate units. Functional decentralization implies that the functions are decentralized to the specialized units or departments like education or health. Political decentralization involves that the political powers and functions concentrated in the hands of higher level political organs are decentralized to lower level political organ. We are all aware that Panchayati Raj agencies are units of decentralization wherein political powers of decision making are decentralized from state governments to panchayats, samitis, and jila parishads. Finally, in geographical decentralization, the powers and functions of headquarters decentralized to the field departments of the state government, which are further decentralized to their field officers at the regional and district levels. This facilitates quick decision making, keeping in view the local requirements. System of decentralization in India. A highly centralized imperial rule was gradually decentralized at the level of provinces and with the Government of India Act 1919 and the Government of India Act 1935. Under the Act of 1919, as a sequel to the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms, diarchy was introduced in the provinces. This meant that certain departments were for the first time put in charge of elected ministers responsible to the legislature, and the remaining departments were kept in the charge of government officials. The members of the government's executive council, the Act of 1935, for the first time introduced a federal form of government and conferred provincial autonomy on the provinces subject to certain safeguards. This process of decentralization of powers from central government to the provincial government was deliberately pursued during British rule for a variety of reasons such as administrative convenience, political pressure generated by the national freedom struggle and the need for political accommodation of the elite and the intelligentsia. There was another kind of decentralization effort noticeable during the colonial rule. The policy of setting up local self-governing bodies in urban and rural areas. It is this it is this form of decentralization at the grassroots level that continues to raise doubts and debates even today. And the decentralization debate has assumed considerable significance in recent times for two important reasons. First, poverty elevations poverty elevation and social justice have become a major political agenda. Institutional decentralization in this context is being debated. Second, the Panchayati Raj institutions have been languishing in most states. Absence of a constitutional guarantee has been diagnosed as the cause of Panchayati Raj decay. The mode of constitutional protection of Panchayati Raj became a debatable proposition since the proposal was first mooted by the previous government. Pre-independence period. The decentralization debate during colonial rule can be traced to the famous Ripon Resolution of 1882 to train the Indians in the art of governance, to enable them to learn from experience and to open up avenues for political participation of the educated class. Ripon strongly advocated the cause of decentralization of administration through the establishment of local self-governing institutions. The British administrators were not prepared to accept the Ripon thesis, as they questioned the competence of Indians to manage local administration and feared a general weakening of field administration under a local self-government regime. The debate was essentially over the choice of values, democracy or efficiency. With the rising tempo of freedom struggle, the imperial policy had to, however, willingly concede Indian demands for self-government and participation in administration. Post-independence period. The second phase of the decentralization debate in post-independence India was staged on the floor of the Constituent Assembly. Panchayati Raj was an important component of Mahatma Gandhi's vision of future India, in which economic and political power would be decentralized and each village would be self-reliant economically. It was in accordance with the wishes of the Mahatma Gandhi that Article 40 of the Constitution of India was adopted, stipulating that the state shall take steps to organize village panchayats and endow them with such powers and authority as may be necessary to enable them to function as units of self-government. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, however, had a different view of the Indian rural society. He argued in the Constituent Assembly that the Indian social structure at the village level was hierarchical, oppressive and insensitive to change. In this view, it could be dangerous to give powers to the panchayats, as he thought that would mean giving powers to the prevailing rural power structure, which would work to the detriment of the Harijans and the rural poor. Two contrasting views about decentralization had thus surfaced in the Constituent Assembly: a visionary standpoint of decentralization and a realistic view of decentralization. Any scheme of decentralization presupposes a harmonious society. As Dantwala has observed, in an unequal society, democratic or decentralized political or planning mechanisms do not succeed in ensuring genuine people's participation. The Gandhian vision of village society is a normative model that serves the purpose of a guidepost. But the reality of rural life and the experiences of Panchayati Raj in India seems to have largely confirmed the belief of Dr. Ambedkar. It is interesting in this context to note the observations of the Ashok Mehta Committee on Panchayati Raj institutions. Panchayati Raj institutions are dominated by economically and socially privileged sections of society and have as such facilitated the emergence of oligarchic forces yielding no benefits to weaker sections. The decentralization debate has its roots at the conceptual level. The concept of Panchayati Raj has been far from clear, and as the Ashok Mehta committee commented, some would treat it as an administrative agency, others as an extension of democracy at the grassroots level, and still others as a charter of rural local government. The bureaucracy democracy debate over the decentralization, which is as old as the Ripon reforms of the late 19th century, has been rehearsed in recent times as well. When it came to entrusting local developmental responsibilities, most governments opted for their official field machinery and virtually bypassed the Panchayati Raj institutions. As the Ashok Mehta committee reported, some of the state governments would postpone the holding of elections or supersede the Panchayati Raj institutions from one region or the other. The lukewarm attitude of the political elite at higher levels towards strengthening of the democratic process at the grassroots was generally the crux of the matter. Recent trends in the decentralization. Even with our development planning experience of more than 4 decades, there is no sign of abatement of poverty and social injustice in the form of operation of the Harijans and the rural poor. One important reason for this state of affairs that has been widely acknowledged in centralized administration and planning and languishing popular institutions at the grassroots level. At the end of 1985, this point was clearly brought out by the G.V.K. Rao Committee on Administrative Arrangements for Rural Development (CARD). The committee emphasized the importance of local initiative in local development and recommended a revitalization of the Panchayati Raj institutions. Research findings revealed that the developmental process had gradually been bureaucratized and divorced from the Panchayati Raj institutions, leading to what has been aptly termed as grass without root. To quote one study, the basic reason for the failure of rural development and poverty alleviation programs is the exclusion of the people from participation in the development process and the abandonment of the institutions of democratic decentralization and the related electoral process. The G.V.K. Rao Committee came out with a blueprint of a decentralized system of field administration with Panchayati Raj playing the lead role in local planning and development. Another novel decentralization plan below the state level has been advocated by Nirmal Mukherjee through devolution of political powers to directly elected district governments in India. Such a decentralization plan will of course virtually affect the Panchayati Raj structure from the direct to the village. The other committee on Beman, the languishing of grassroots democracy, is the L.M. Singhvi Committee on Revitalization of PRIs for Democracy and Development 1986. The Panchayati Raj institutions, as the committee has observed, have become moribund and they have been denuded of their promise and vitality. To revive Panchayati Raj, the committee recommended that local self-government should be constitutionally organized, protected and preserved by the inclusion of new chapter in the constitution. This has since been achieved through the 73rd Constitutional Amendment 1992 that accords constitutional status to Panchayati Raj institutions. At the same time, municipal bodies have been accorded constitutional status under the 74th Amendment 1992. The constitutional status of local government, rural and urban, has been discussed in detail in Block 4 of this course. Factors impeding decentralization. Decentralization is to be seen not only as a method or approach in administration, it has other dimensions also. To what extent there is actual decentralization depends on a variety of factors: administrative, political, social, and cultural. Administratively, in a society where there has been a long practice of centralization of power, those at the higher levels find it rather difficult to be mentally prepared to transfer powers to local levels. Conversely, because of long habit of always looking above for receiving orders, there is inertia on the parts of the persons working at lower echelons. They would wait they would wait for an order from the above. In some cases, it has been found that even when power has been decentralized, there is a tendency to shift the responsibility of taking decisions to the higher levels to play safe so that the onus of responsibility does not fall on them. If something goes wrong administratively, rules and procedures are also laid down for decentralization of powers, but it is seen that in actual practice, things are not what they ought to be. There is always a method of getting around the system so that decisions are made from levels higher than that at which the decision should have been taken. Politically, also, we find that though legally and constitutionally decentralization might have been provided for, and yet in reality, in many cases, decisions are being taken by the political executive, even in those areas which may not fall strictly in his or her own domain. Because of the hold of the political parties and the practice of the local politicians being nominees of the politicians at the state and national level, the very purpose of decentralization gets defeated. Socially and culturally, also, if the society is paternalistic, this concept of paternalism also gets transferred to the administrative structures. And this results either in the superior officer acting like a patriarch habituated to giving orders to the officials at the local levels, or conversely, the officials at the lower level resent every order or decision or even decision on part of their superiors as undesirable imposition. The very spirit of decentralization of power lies in the fact that we recognize that there are levels of decision making, and at each level we have personnel competent enough to take decisions at their level. The success or failure of decentralization, therefore, to a very great extent, depends on the mentality and attitude of the superior authorities towards their subordinate authorities, whether or not it is based on trust and confidence. In reality, decentralization is the cumulative result of decentralization of functions, finances, and functionaries. Mere legislative provisions Mere legislative provision does not lead to decentralization in actual life. There must be the genuine political will to decentralize. Summary: the process of decentralizing powers to the lower levels of governance had been going on since the pre-independence days. The motives, assumptions, and political administrative compulsions have, however, differed from age to age. Since independence, India has been experiencing with decentralization and development. The establishment of Panchayati Raj institutions on the recommendations of Balwant Rai Mehta Committee 1957 was a landmark in the history of decentralized development. For a variety of reasons, the Panchayati Raj institutions could not play the desired role, and in most states, the institutions languished for want of political production and administrative and financial support. Reports of commissions and committees and many research studies have pointed out the danger of continued neglect of the grassroots institutions, both for the health of Indian democracy and for bringing about meaningful local development with active popular participation. The Constitutional Amendment 73rd for Panchayati Raj and 74th for municipal bodies have since been enacted, granting constitutional status to local government. The decentralization debate has assumed considerable significance in recent times for various reasons, as discussed in this unit. There is the need to deepen democracy. People at the grassroots level need to be empowered, and above all, participatory development is possible. is possible and becomes a reality only with decentralization. In this unit, an attempt was made to discuss the approaches, types of decentralization, evolution of system of decentralization in India. It also highlighted the recent trends and functioning of institutions of decentralization in India and factors impeding decentralization.